Hello and welcome to Stretford Paddock. My name is Joe and today we are here with a big one-on-one interview. I'm joined by Adam Crafton from The Athletic. How are you, first of all?
I'm good, thank you. Thank you for having me on the channel.
Thank you for coming on. And of course, Adam, you've been a journalist for a long time. You've done many things, but recently sort of thrust into the spotlight with your article surrounding United's handling of the Mason Greenwood situation and the sort of following and you know, after that, the U-turn from Manchester United. Mm-hmm. You kind of broke that story. You brought all this extra evidence, all this extra news that United themselves responded to pretty much in the moment you put your article out. Just first of all, just on that article, and we'll go through how United dealt with this, what they've learned from that situation, and how that sort of pertains to the Antony situation and maybe even the Jadon Sancho one. But first of all, that article that you broke about Mason Greenwood, stating that Manchester United had decided to bring him back into the squad. That was the decision at that moment. When you put the article out, the initial backlash wasn't just from, you know, social media or people it was also from the club saying we haven't made a decision yet. First of all, talk to me about how that article came to be and how bizarre it was almost having Man United being part of the response to it, because it was a strange situation, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was unusual. And I suppose what I would always say in these situations is we, at The Athletic, we dealt in the facts. And the facts, which haven't been disputed by Man United, are that we reported at the start of August, Richard Arnold held this meeting with his executive leadership team, which is, we don't really tend to talk about executive leadership teams when we talk about football, but it's basically the leading execs at the football club, not the owners, that kind of level below. And during that meeting, he said to them that the plan, the intention, is to bring back Mason Greenwood, and distributed a plan which, you know, was very, very extensive. It had more than a dozen revisions, right? If you go version 1, version 2, version 3, I think that emphasises how advanced and matured it was. And we also reported that the plan for Arnold was to record a video explaining their decision to bring him back. We also recorded, this was the first piece we did because there was a few, that the plan was actually to bring him, to make the announcement on August the 4th.
Yeah.
And we reported this about 2 weeks after, so that announcement didn't happen, right? And clearly the reason for the delay for that, as far as we know, is that United wanted to engage with some of their key stakeholders. So that might be sponsors, it might be the women's team, it might be fans advisory board, anything like that. And what happened was they kind of remembered that the women were still at the World Cup, right, out in Australia and New Zealand at the time. And I think that was the reason why at that point it got delayed. And it wasn't quite that they wanted to consult with the women's team, you know, to ask. It wasn't a kind of let's sit down and let the women make the decision, right? It was far more, we don't want this to be a shock when it turns up on the Manchester United website. We want to communicate this to you so you have some notice. And obviously, if the response would have been overwhelming from sponsors, from women's team, from fans advisory board, then they may have had to think again. So all we reported at that point was the plan as it's been laid out by Richard Arnold at the end of this investigation at that stage was to bring him back.
So following that then, and following the backlash that United faced, first of all, they obviously made a U-turn. They decided, actually, we can't bring him back. He won't be part of the club anymore. They released a statement, which I want to go through certainly parts of, because some of it was kind of by the book and some of it was, frankly, bizarre, the wording and the kind of storyline that they painted with that statement. But what do you think they expected? Because you released your article, they obviously released almost like a counter statement at the same time. And then from there, social media saw that actually United were planning, at least at one point, to bring Mason Greenwood back. And then people started to say, you can't do this. And I would say rightfully so. I said, you know, whenever it was sort of acceptable to comment on the situation, I said, I don't want him playing for Manchester United again. But do you think United expected for there to be no backlash? Because even the amount they got pre-U-turn wasn't exactly overwhelming. There were, you know, there was no sponsors pulling out. There was no Monday Night Football with, you know, big people talking about this and condemning this. It kind of was yourself and other journalists and then some people on social media. But it had hardly got to kind of, you know, the Spanish FA sort of heights of controversy before they performed this U-turn. Do you think they assumed it would be plain sailing, Mason Greenwood welcome back?
No, I don't. And I think that's emphasised by the fact, that we revealed as part of their planning that they had lists of expected positive or negative stakeholders, right? So that was where the whole story around, they had basically a list of pundits, journalists, charities, domestic abuse charities, and they were kind of categorising them based on expected to be supportive, expected to be hostile, expected to be, I don't know, on the fence, something like that. Maybe the same with fans groups, I don't know. And as a result of that shows they did anticipate, right, a backlash. Now, there was a very, very strong reaction to that story, right, that they categorised people in that way. And I understand that, right? Like, of course, we knew that there would be that strong reaction. At the same time, if Manchester United were planning to bring him back, then in that world of, I suppose, executive leadership, consultancy, all of that kind of thing, you do risk assessments, you do stakeholder assessments, you anticipate, if you're working communications, you anticipate, well, what's going to be the issues that could halt this plan in some way or that could bring down this plan. So, no, they saw it coming. I agree with you that it was it was amazing to me how quickly it moved, right? So we put out the story on the Wednesday of what Richard Arnold had told his meeting. On Wednesday afternoon, Man United put out a statement, which was, if you remember, it was a lot of words. And I think most fans because at that point we hadn't actually published our article. That was the other thing, right? That response that United put was also their response to me going to them and saying, this is what we're intending to publish about what Richard said in the meeting. But many fans would have just seen that statement go on the United website and been like, what?
Yeah.
Like, what's going on? So at that point, they were kind of saying, we're still deliberating. And look, they're always going to have plausible deniability that that nothing was decided, because nothing's decided until something's announced, right? Until something is announced, human beings can change their mind. What we know is that it was sufficiently advanced that Richard Arnold's got his main people in the room and he's telling them this is what we're planning to do and this is how we're going to execute it. In terms of the backlash surprising them, I don't think it would have surprised them. I think what we did see, a bit like the Super League, was when it really comes to it, even if Manchester United appear to believe in something and want to do it, they lack people who are prepared to, I suppose, go out and articulate that view. If Manchester United really believed the right thing to do on the basis of an internal investigation was to bring back Mason Greenwood, as they appear to do, then there will be some people who feel they should have, the chief executive should have just come out and explained that. Or John Murtagh should have come out to explain that as the football director. I'm not saying it's my personal view, but if that is what the club wants to do, I think it was once again an example of like the kind of panic and anxiety that brings down United whenever they appear to decide something and then they're very, very malleable to sentiment.
Yeah. It's strange as well, though, that they went from, like you said, expecting some backlash, obviously, because they've conducted these, sentiment kind of analysis, and yet we're still willing to fold to the outcomes that they already expected. Why did they even, in the first place, plan to bring him back if they were also willing to fold under the pressure? You just think, you could understand them going, well, we want him back, but we know we won't be allowed to. Let's not do it. It's weird that they said, actually, no, we're going to bring him back. Oh, but we know there'll be backlash. And then when the backlash comes, they then U-turn. That's just, like you said, it doesn't smell like strong leadership to me in any fashion. It just smells like, well, we've got to kind of do what the public want us to do. Just in terms of your sort of personal side of this, obviously getting this together, I'm sure it wasn't just you and the people working on it, or maybe it was just you, but certainly it took a lot of work, I'm sure, to get this article stood up, put together, released. And first of all, I'd like to say that I think it was a brilliant article, and I think it was a necessary and crucial article in the storyline of this situation, because I think maybe without it and a few other articles that came out, but certainly yours, Mason Greenwood may well have been playing for Manchester United now. And personally, I think that would have been a terrible thing for Manchester United. How did you feel releasing that? Because if United know there's going to be backlash to him playing, you must know there's going to be backlash to this article releasing that news. Did you fear the backlash at all? Was it, on a personal level, how did it feel putting yourself at basically the front of this story? How did that feel?
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I was really concerned about was that we had the facts right? Like that's the biggest fear you have as a journalist, right? That you've got the facts wrong. Because, and particularly when you're talking about a story like this where, this is a situation that had been going on, for over 18 months. And I think everyone had wanted to know what the plan was, what the resolution was going to be. I think people had been extremely careful in how they'd had to report on it because of, obviously, there was a criminal investigation. Obviously, I should say that Greenwood has denied all the charges, etc. And as a result of that, like, this isn't a story you could get wrong.
No.
Right? This isn't a story where, this isn't a transfer story where, someone's been linked with a club or something like that where you might be able to talk your way out of it. So that was the main anxiety. In terms of backlash and stuff like that, like the reality is we write about difficult things at football clubs all the time, and that's kind of the job now. And I think the way that Twitter or X now is, like, unfortunately it is a reality of the job that whatever you could go on X now, right? And am I calling it X, am I calling it Twitter?
Call it either,
whatever. You could write, it's raining outside, and someone will come back at you and say, no, it's bright sunshine, right? Like, that's the way the world is now. Fine. And as a result of that, you kind of just have to not put up with it, but be prepared for it. And I think, over time, just through experience, and unfortunate experience, quite a lot of it, you don't become immune, but it starts to bother you less, I suppose.
Okay. I mean, it's a shame that has to be the case, but I'm glad that you're willing to go through that, and the fact that
But I would just say, it's been interesting, sort of seeing the way that football supporters have been portrayed during this episode. I would say like 80% of the messages I received were positive.
Good.
It was like positive, sort of, thank you for bringing this to light, rather than, oh my God, you've done this to Mason Greenwood, you've done that to Mason Greenwood. So actually, I thought that was quite noticeable, actually. And that was also in like direct messages, public messages. So it didn't feel to me like a negative personal experience. Okay,
good. Yeah, like I said, I'm sure that backlash was there, but the fact that more than that there were positive responses is obviously a great thing. And I think people, if nothing else, were impressed by the journalism of it all, if you know what I mean. Even if they didn't agree with what you said, I'm sure there were some people that sat there and think, well, at least we know what was going on behind the scenes now, because we hadn't heard anything officially until you put that out. So I want to move on to the next sort of official line that we got, which was the statement, I believe, well, it was on the 21st of August, so just around a week later, just under a week later, I think, talking about Mason Greenwood and the club statement that United released about him. Obviously, they said that he's not going to carry on at the club, and it would be most appropriate for him to do so away from Old Trafford, was the phrase that they used when talking about him recommencing his career. There's a quote in there that I wanted to get your thoughts on, and just sort of if you'd heard anything on this. The second paragraph, so it's high up in the statement. Based on the evidence available to us, we have concluded that the material posted online did not provide a full picture, and that Mason did not commit the offences in respect of which he was originally charged. That said, as Mason publicly acknowledges today, he has made mistakes which he has taken responsibility for. Why do you think United felt it necessary to publicly say that they thought he was innocent of the charges that he'd been charged for, or the offences he'd been charged for? Because that to me reads very, very strangely, like saying, well, we know something you don't, and we can't prove it, but we're just going to tell you that actually he's innocent, and essentially it's you lot kicking up a fuss that means we've had to get rid of him. That's how I read that as a United fan. What do you make of that, and what did you make of that when you read that?
It felt to me as though the statement they put out that day wouldn't have been that different to the one they might have put out in the event that Mason Greenwood stayed at the club. Yeah, actually, because there's a lot of, apart from the eventual line, which is, I think the words they use is something like, because of the spotlight of Manchester United, kind of the exposure of playing, I'm paraphrasing here, like the exposure of playing for Manchester United is being decided it's best. So it wasn't a kind of, we think it's sort of ethically or morally the right decision. I mean, what they basically were saying was, we've done an internal investigation, we've decided that we don't believe that Mason did the things that he was accused of, which he also denied. And I always found it strange the way that United went about it, because you have a criminal investigation which ended, and United were in a difficult position in the sense of, it's very unusual with these cases where the public have seen and heard as much as they had in this case. And my feeling as a reporter was always, without an adequate explanation to the public for what they've seen and heard, this is going to be a very, very difficult thing for Manchester United and Mason Greenwood to navigate in a way that he's able to go back to playing for the club. And then you also have this kind of, there's more, them sort of hinting like, oh, there's more to it, but we can't tell you what that is. And so therefore you're kind of expecting a fan base and a public that doesn't really trust Manchester United's leadership and ownership to take their word, right? And I think as a result of that, this was always, if I'm just looking at it not from a ethical position, but from a, I suppose, strategic plan kind of idea for Manchester United, that to me always made this seem borderline impossible. And I think the only way they would have been able to, I suppose, pull this off, and I don't mean that in a positive way, but in terms of the plan, would probably have been if nothing had leaked at all. So if nothing had leaked whatsoever, and United were able to execute every single part of the plan in terms of, the first time anyone hears about this, it's a very long statement, as that one is, sort of detailing all these things. You've got Richard Arnold's video statement. Then maybe you have a press conference where Ten Hag or John Murtough talk about integrating the player back into the fold. I think that's kind of what they were hoping it would be. But clearly, there were people within the football club who were very, very unhappy about this. I mean, we reported clearly the fact this came to light even demonstrates that. But also we reported that that there were staff that were prepared to put their jobs on the line, that were prepared to strike. Talking about going on strike, like this is it's a private enterprise. That's not what happens at football clubs usually. So I think there was maybe an underestimation of the willingness of United's own staff and how deeply they cared about this thing. I was talking to people who were saying, my friends and family are saying, are you guys really doing this? And you're working for this club. They felt this kind of sense, this is what they said, a sense of guilt and shame. And it's, from the people who were speaking to me for this reporting, it came from a place in their view of, this is what they believe to be the right thing to do, rather than sort of, I'm just looking to cause trouble, which, sometimes you get sort of disaffected employees within an organisation. That wasn't the case here.
It's just so strange to me, that line of, we didn't do it. We know he didn't do it, but you lot don't.
I think there's probably limitations in terms of what they can say legally, because you have the complainant's right to anonymity, which hasn't been waived. So as a result of that, there probably are limitations to how much United can say. But given those limitations exist, I think United probably should have known this is going to be very, very, very difficult.
Yeah, and I'm surprised they even included that, personally. I don't think they needed to mention his innocence or lack thereof at all, really.
Well, there was also the line, wasn't there, about him being cleared. I think it was in his own statement, right? Him saying that he'd been cleared of charge, and that's just a very different thing to what actually happened.
There were rumours that came out afterwards from social media, and I think from the press as well, that the internal investigation involved almost exclusively, or pretty much exclusively, speaking to Mason himself about the situation. Do you know anything about that? And do you have any idea about what it, obviously maybe not the details, but what they may be referencing here when they're talking about this extra information, or the evidence available to us, this material did not provide a full picture? Do you know what this full picture is that they're referring to, and how they acquired that full picture?
Yeah, I mean, they definitely spoke to Mason Greenwood. They didn't speak directly to the complainant. I believe they briefed that they'd spoken to the family of the complainant, and also given the opportunity for, I suppose, corrections or inaccuracies when it came to sort of bringing together their final report that would go over to Richard Arnold. And, I'm sure they would have spoken to lots of people who had experience of Mason Greenwood within the club and things like that. But yeah, I suppose people will make their own mind up based on that. Certainly, I think, United themselves, it was interesting, the panel that they put together, you had Richard Arnold kind of sitting at the top where it would be fed into him. And then you had people from different parts of the club. So you had the Chief Operating Officer, Colette Roach, you had kind of Head of Communications, Marketing, Ellie Norman, John Murtagh, Football Director, Patrick Stewart, who was the Legal Counsel. And they're all kind of from different parts of the company, right? So in theory, you should have a balance there that competes with one another, right? So you could have someone in there who's saying, "Oh, think about the sponsors," or someone in there saying, "Oh no, but it might be the football side thinking, well, he's been on the books since 6 years old, 7 years old," which appeared to be the view, right? And therefore, if Mason Greenwood's going to come back, this is our mess and we should clean it up. I think that was a little bit of the view from the football side. And those forces should have, I think, balanced together and countered each other quite well. Now, I've not been privy to all those discussions and how robust those discussions were and where those scales lay in terms of the priorities of the organisation, whether it was around duty of care to Greenwood, whether it was around duty of care to people who feel incredibly strongly and who have experienced some of the things that we're talking about here, whether that's violence against women or things like that. And in the end, it was hard to work out where United's ultimate priorities lay. And I did think it was hugely notable that they hadn't consulted any of those charities, right, throughout this process, like at any stage until our reporting came about when they then reached out. So I think when they reflect on this, I think that's something that they themselves would acknowledge to be a mistake.
Yeah, well, I hope so, because, in any situation like this, surely you want a mixture of experts from all of the fields involved.
Yeah,
so football and business and then domestic abuse and, surely that they should be involved from the start.
Yeah, and I think it's not a case of Man United, calling up Women's Aid and delegating the decision, right? I think they could have done it in a sensible way, in the sense of let's invite some of these charities in that may be relevant to what we're working on, and just let them inform us in a way, almost like a workshop, right? Like before we go about this process, making sure we know as much as possible about the sensitivities of this process. That doesn't mean we have to do what they necessarily want at the end of that process, but it means we have, at least listened, right?
Yeah. Just moving on slightly from your original article that we spoke about, there's a line there: "The Athletic has been repeatedly told that the club's football operations department, including Murtagh and head coach Erik Ten Hag, are supportive of Greenwood's reintegration." That to me is bizarre personally. What does that say about sort of what is accepted maybe by those people individually, but also sort of by football as a whole, that, the footballing side of things were like, yeah, bring him back. Where did that come from? What does that say, do you think?
So I've never met John Murtagh or Erik Ten Hag in a kind of a one-on-one situation. So I don't want to make kind of assumptions about, them as people, or, what I will say is like 100% stand by that reporting. Yeah. United never disputed that line, obviously conscious when you're writing that line, that people will feel very strongly, right, about what that might say about those individuals and how they prioritised it. I think what I also just said around United's football department, I think felt very strongly around the duty of care to a player that had been in their academy. Yeah. I think that weighed very heavily in terms of the motivations. And look, right, I imagine there was also people saying, Man United don't score many goals, right? Whether we like that or not, I'm sure. One of the things I always found interesting during this, it was like, well, if this was a reserve left back or something like that, would United have gone as far as they did? And I think the reality is, of course, there was it came into consideration that you had a player that many people believed, 2.5 years ago, was one of the best ever Manchester United academy products. Yeah. And I think it's pretty fanciful to believe that wouldn't have played a part in the thinking of the football department, as well as that duty of care. And maybe also, and here I'm speaking entirely speculatively, and you can talk about other football clubs that have been fielding players who are, under investigation at certain times as well. I think we are seeing a bit of a moment at the moment within sort of men's football where people are realising, actually, do we take some of this stuff sufficiently seriously? Now, United would say that they've learned certain lessons from the handling of Greenwood. I think you've seen some of that in that they've been far more proactive around the case of Antony, which is a very different case, but I think you have seen at least evidence of that. And United have also, I think, really sought to reach out to staff who were hugely unhappy during the Greenwood affair. And they held an all-staff meeting last week where a number of questions were taken on the handling of the Greenwood case and also on the Antony case as well. So I think, if there's one good thing that kind of came out of all this, it does seem like United are at least attempting to learn lessons from it.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it, that United, the size of the club that they are, and that the amount of resources that's been available to them for so long, so many things, whether it be on the pitch, off the pitch, with transfers, with CEOs, with this sort of PR situation and legal situation, they always seem to be learning afterwards. They're never the ones leading the way. We're the ones following other people's examples or making up for our own mistakes. I used to think of United as this sort of shining light of here's how this is done, here's how it works on the pitch, here's how you win trophies, here's how you make money. And now we're going, that idea's good and we could do a bit of that, or we shouldn't do that again. It's just a shame that everything seems retroactive and sort of copycat almost.
If I ask you a question, I'm certainly not defending, reporting sort of, I think, spoke for itself in terms of the facts on the case, but do you think a different Premier League club would have handled it differently? The Greenwood case.
Yeah.
I'm not sure they would.
Well, yeah, I was going to say, I don't have a particular one that jumps to mind that I could say with certainty would do things any better.
I don't have confidence in that. I don't have confidence that other Premier League clubs, I think now that this has happened, they may do, but I think there is clearly a deeper cultural issue within men's football, and maybe men's sport more generally. I think narrowing it to football is maybe unfair. That means, that it almost might take something like this where United have kind of been stunned into it a little bit for other clubs to catch up on that. Yeah,
I think you're probably right. Do you think he could ever play for United again? Because they said he needs to. Let me just get the exact phrase in there again. Mason recognised everyone involved, including Mason, recognised the difficulties with him recommencing his career at Manchester United. It has therefore been mutually agreed that it would be the most appropriate for him to do so away from Old Trafford. He has recommenced his career. He's playing, getting minutes at the moment. Is that the end of it as far as his time at United is concerned, or now he's recommenced his career, maybe the next step could be with Manchester United? Do you think that's a possibility?
I don't know. I mean, United have said that they don't expect him to play for the club again. That was reiterated by Richard Arnold in this all-staff meeting last week as well. I mean, he was directly asked the question, can you promise, this was a staff member asking the question, can you pledge that Greenwood will not play again? I think his answer was, we've already said that there's no expectation that Mason will play again for United. He could have been stronger in that answer. He could have just said absolutely not or something like that. I think there might be a degree of, he's still contracted to the club. So I don't know what the legal implications are of, a chief executive saying this person who's contracted to us can never do anything for us. So I don't know whether that plays into it a little bit. I'm speculating. Ultimately, United had 3 options or 4 options. They had the option of exploring sacking him, when all of this sort of first came about, selling him, loaning him, or bringing him back. Now, clearly bringing him back is initially off the table. they then had this choice between sort of loan or sell, I think, because once their statement says we don't think he's done the things, then I don't really understand how they could sack him, because they've basically said, they've basically given a green light to every other club there, haven't they? Because every club in future, as Getafe have done, will just say, well, Man United did the inquiry and the police, and also, I suppose, more importantly, the police investigation ended, and therefore, but I think that's why the United statement and the points you raise in it are so significant, because they have really rolled out the red carpet to his return somewhere else, in terms of, I suppose, justifying that. In terms of can he come back, I'd be surprised. Okay. I'd be really surprised, just in terms of, it would be a U-turn based on what is currently being said. Now, who knows, right? If he scores 25 goals, the club changes ownership, who knows? You're talking about sort of things that we can't currently see into the future. But at the moment, I don't see it as being likely. And just the other thing was that question of do you loan him or sell him? United had about 9 days to do that deal. And you probably had a lot of reluctant bidders. And I mean, I know there was clubs where, a bit like United, you had the football side saying, maybe we should pick him up, we need a few goals, and you had sort of people at the top saying absolutely not, or we need to think more deeply about this. And the other thing is United, they're not good at selling people at the best of times, right? So if you've got 9 days to sell someone who is a controversial at best asset, that's difficult. So I therefore it was that choice of release him or loan him, and they chose to loan him. And also, just finally, they might have thought there could have been a backlash if they sold him and took money. Yeah. They might have been conscious of that as well, like cashing 10 million quid with everything that had gone on. I'm not sure necessarily how I feel about. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, making a profit on.
I don't know
this
how you
situation
how you as a fan would feel.
Yeah, I don't know either. I think obviously the fee would be drastically reduced based. Is pre this situation value to now is obviously slashed by 90% more, whatever. But United then going, right, let's pocket 15 million quid that we got from this situation does seem strange. And again, that's another thing they're going to have to deal with at some point if they are to get rid of him. Let's just sort of move on then, because unfortunately there's no shortage of controversy and difficult situations at United at the moment. I think the most sort of logical next step is to talk about the Antony situation. Yeah,
next right winger.
Yeah, exactly. There was a sort of a host of allegations that came out about him, about sort of physical abuse and verbal and emotional abuse from a multitude of different ex-partners and partners, some of which have now been dropped. Antony himself has been taken out of the squad. The line there was that he decided to do this. As far as you're aware, is that the case? Or was this a joint decision, or even just Manchester United's decision to take him out of the team while this was going on?
I don't know. I think, what's very clear is that these cases came very, very close together, as in the point at which the Antony one really started to build momentum came very close after Greenwood. And I think United were clearly they were in the eye of a media storm. And I don't think it's surprising, therefore, that they were maybe more cautious than they might have been 6 months ago, a year ago, in a similar situation. Now, clearly, the cases are very different. I think one of the complainants is with the police, both in Manchester and also Brazil. So really, I think it's a case of waiting for that to play out. I mean, United have said they've given Antony time away to deal with the allegations. Now, that could take, police don't always work quickly on this stuff, and you're talking about 2 different countries having to deal with it. So, I don't expect this to be, I might be proven wrong, right? But I don't expect this to be a speedy resolution, because you're basically now in the hands of the police. And I actually think, United, in terms of their handling of this one, have been more proactive, I think, than any other club would have been in this situation. Equally, once you start having multiple complainants going public, it's clearly an untenable situation, both for the player and also for the club as well. And clearly, for the complainants as well, it takes incredible courage to put your name to those complaints, particularly when going public, when you've got sort of a very big fan base, around the player as well. So at the moment, I think it's a bit of a waiting game with Antony. He's denying the allegations that have been made against him. He's said a lot, right? Like he's done it.
In contrast to Greenwood, he's come out and been very public and very open with his emotions and his feelings, hasn't he? Yeah,
and I think it's been a hard one to follow for kind of like football fans in Manchester, because you're kind of going through international media and there's stuff going on in Brazilian TV. You're picking up snippets of it here, snippets of it there. You see, I don't know, an aggregator take one line, and that becomes very, very big. So I think this has been a difficult one to get a firm grasp of. But clearly, United are sufficiently concerned that they've basically said, look, it's probably best that you stay away, and he's probably had to agree to that.
Just, presumably he's not going to be playing again now until there's a resolution here. Like you said, that could be, I don't know, a year before we find that. Do you think he's going to come back before then, and he's had time to gather his thoughts, or do you think that was a you're not playing until this is dealt with type situation? Because this could be a very long time for a £80 million player that Ten Hag brought in, probably his flagship signing so far. Do you think that he's going to come back before that, or are we just sat here waiting for months and months and maybe even years?
I think the issue is so serious. I mean, could you imagine if complete keep saying I'm speculating to protect myself, but if he was to come back in 2 weeks' time, without all of this resolved, and then a year down the line he was to be charged or something like that, United would be killed, right? And so, and I'm sorry that I keep making it about sort of United's reputation and how United see this, when it's about sort of far more important issues around the alleged treatment of women. But I think that's why, to me, I can only see him coming back if there's a resolution at the moment. And also if you just go off what Man United have said, giving him time to go away and handle the allegations that he's been facing. So at the moment, I don't see another way around it. But as you say, that could be a very long time.
Yeah, and moving on to another situation that's going on at Manchester United. Obviously,
can we not talk about the win at Burnley or Johnny Evans?
If we were top of the league, maybe we could have sort of got rid of some of this stuff. But there's not too many exciting and happy things happening at Man United at the moment. Just moving on to the next one, Jadon Sancho, obviously out of the squad. This sort of public spat with Ten Hag. I think as of recording today, he's just deactivated his Instagram account. So that's another sort of kind of turn in all of this. What's going on there? Is it simply Ten Hag wants an apology, or is he done with Manchester United? As Ten Hag said, that's enough. You're gone. And this whole sort of he's not coming back till he gets an apology thing. Presumably an apology doesn't change whether he's working hard in training. What is happening there?
Well, at the moment, he's not training with the first team even.
Yeah.
Which is a pretty dramatic thing, for a player who is, was signed for what's over 70 million quid a couple of summers ago. Huge excitement around him. Everyone knows about the disagreement that took place the week before the Arsenal game. You had Ten Hag kind of had the view that he wasn't training well enough. He was asked a question in a press conference to say, why isn't Jadon Sancho here? And he answered it honestly. I don't think it was over the top as an answer. He didn't have to say it, is what I would say. He didn't have to. He could have just kind of kept it in-house. Equally, I think as a journalist, for me to say that is a bit weird, right? Like,
we want to know,
right? We want to know, and fans pay a lot of money and follow the team, and they're probably wondering where one of their most expensive players is. So if he's asked a question and answers honestly, I don't think it was he wasn't libelous or defamatory or anything like that, or it was just he's not trained that well this week, right? Well, every player's probably had a week like that, to be honest, in their career. But clearly it blew up because Jadon Sancho went straight onto social media. I was surprised how quickly people kind of set up camp, right? Whether it was in Ten Hag's camp or Sancho's camp, to say, I'm Team Ten Hag on this, or Ten Hag's treating him really unfairly. I just think it's so hard to know, right? As journalists, as fans, like, we don't see the conversations that take place all the time. I thought there was a concerning line in Sancho's statement where he spoke about being a scapegoat over quite a long period of time. Like, that to me was a bit of a red flag in terms of, one, I kind of wanted him to explain a bit more about what that meant, but also actually, when someone's saying that, you kind of have to listen. And I think that's, so I felt a bit uncomfortable with how quickly, like, the character assassination seemed to be starting around Sancho. Equally, you know, it's now a couple of weeks on, and if all the manager wants is an apology for the way that, you know, Sancho spoke on social media, then I think a lot of fans will be looking at that and just thinking, right, come on, you know, get on. Can we please, you know, you've lost two wide players already this season to very serious issues. Can you two kind of find a way to make this work? And it's a difficult one, because if Ten Hag was to fold, then other people in the dressing room would probably look at him and think, maybe I can get away with certain things. So at the moment, it looks very, very difficult to find a truce between them, which is incredibly sad. You know, I know not everybody at the club is happy with the way that it's being dealt with. Yeah. You know, it's not a unanimous. You have to remember, right? Man United is a huge organisation. Of course. And I'm even here just talking, like, you know, within the football side and all of that kind of thing. There isn't one view on this. There isn't a view of, like, Ten Hag's right or Sancho's right. You know, there are some people looking at it and thinking, okay, like, Jadon might have messed up here, and he might not have trained well, and he might have said a silly thing on social media, or he might have been telling the truth. Like, I don't know, right? He might have been telling the truth. But could the manager also give an inch as well? Yeah. Right? I don't know. What do you think?
Well, it's the thing that I always think with Sancho and the stuff that's come out since about, you know, things with England and Dortmund, and I think he just seems normal, maybe too normal. He wants to stay up a bit late, and he can't really be asked going to work, and at times maybe, you know, the things you hear, and that's what I'm a bit like, and that's what people I know are like, and he almost strikes me as too normal and not of this Cristiano Ronaldo, Bruno Fernandes mindset of, if you're not there an hour early, you're late, and he's a bit just like us almost. But at that high level, you almost need to be a bit more than that. You need to be sort of a little bit kind of different to a normal person, and maybe he doesn't have. I don't think he's a bad guy.
And it's clear, you know, he has some form, right? You know, if you speak to some people at Borussia Dortmund or Manchester City, there will be some negative stories. Equally, there are some incredibly positive stories. I think it's interesting that he really faded out of the England squad. Even though I think it was at the Euros in 2020, and then since then he's just sort of faded out of the picture. And I know part of that is just England have amazing options in those positions, and also his form for Man United. But I mean, it's a bad one, I think, for this moment in time, because I think some people look at the situation with Ten Hag at the moment and they're like, look at all these things that are happening to him. And I look at it slightly differently. I look at it as, actually, well, he probably could have shut the Greenwood thing down quite quickly. Right? If he'd have basically just said, look, this is all more hassle than it's worth. I don't want us to do this. Then that might have been a possibility. I know he wasn't on that panel, but clearly his voice carries weight in the club. And the Sancho stuff, I just don't buy that it's going to... These things are never 100%. No. You know, black and white. There's always shades of grey in it. So, yeah, it's a difficult thing because they don't have... You don't really have a right winger at the moment. No. So you've got like options of Mount, Fernandes, Rashford, Garnacho, Pellistri. But I mean, I think the game against Bayern showed, you know, what some people online appear to think of Pellistri's current level is different to the reality. And
it was anonymous a little bit in that game, wasn't it?
We've just not seen enough to know, right? And the manager sees a lot and mostly decides to change formation to bring McTominay into a diamond against that in that Brighton game, didn't he? Because he clearly didn't feel Pellistri was quite ready. Yeah.
One thing I keep seeing online, which is this, you know, Ten Hag has tried his best with Jadon Sancho. Ten Hag gave Jadon Sancho this 3-month break last year. Do you think Jadon Sancho sees it as being gifted a 3-month break? Or do you think maybe he sees that as another punishment and another thing that actually he thought he was doing okay. He had a bad game against Chelsea, but we all have bad games, and now he's cast out for 3 months. Because I look at that and think, seemingly it's Ten Hag trying to be nice and trying to help. But I could certainly see a world where Jadon Sancho thinks, hang on a sec, he didn't give me a 3-month break. He chucked me out of the team for 3 months. Do you know what I mean? Like you said, it's not everything's 100% here. Do you know anything about that and how that was received?
Yeah, I don't think it's ever been fully explained what was happening there. I think what we can go off is what was made public, which is, he had a period away from, I suppose, first team environment, and he had a period training in Holland. And when he came back, and this is clearly something that's arisen this season, is we heard Ten Hag talk about kind of the physical and mental fitness. Now, I know that there were people at Man United internally who, when that was said, were anxious around maybe the language of what Ten Hag had said there. Equally, like we do talk a lot in sport around, mental strength and
mentality isn't necessarily mental health.
Yeah. So, if there's subsequently been reports recently, hasn't there, that that Ten Hag was making public something that Sancho might have been going through. I don't know how Erik Ten Hag intended what he said, right? So I can't guess that. What we can tell is clearly the way that Sancho appears to have felt about it at the time. However, I also remember when Sancho came back in January, February, the two of them seemed to have a good relationship at that time. So it didn't strike me at that moment as though there was these like lingering resentment. To me, last season, it wasn't going through my mind thinking, oh, Ten Hag and Sancho aren't getting on. It felt far more like maybe Jadon Sancho's having a tough time and he's getting support to see it through. That might be wrong. No. But that was the way that I perceived it
same.
Based on what was public. Clearly, I think there's been issues at the start of this season. And I understand it also from Sancho's point of view, because in pre-season he was playing pretty much every game. I know everyone plays every game in pre-season, but he was starting in the kind of the main team for the first few games, wasn't he? He was like false nine. And then the season started and you had Rashford through the middle, Garnacho was on the left. Sancho could have played either left or as the false nine. So he was essentially relegated twice, kind of in that. And then he came on against Spurs, didn't he? I thought he was quite good, actually, when he came on against Spurs in that game, relative to sort of how bad some of the others were that day. And then the next week, I think he also... He didn't start, did he, against Forest?
I don't think so.
So clearly it feels like there was a bit of a build-up. And then he's left out of the squad in the fourth game. So you start to think, well, I might have had a half-decent pre-season. I mean, there's that goal he scored against Arsenal where he looked faster than he was had done
running away from his defender, wasn't he?
So maybe he felt there was a kind of a misalignment between what was being suggested of his role pre-season. I mean, equally, we also know that I think if United would have had an offer for Jadon Sancho this summer, they'd have taken it. Because they were looking to bring money in, but that level of offer didn't come.
Just again, I'll ask you the same question I've asked you a couple of times. Do you think there's a way back for him? Do you? Yeah. You do?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I remember Carlos Tevez and Roberto Mancini. Right. Carlos Tevez was off playing golf for months and then came back and won them the title, didn't he? Much to United's pain back in 2012. So I do think these situations are recoverable if the parties involved want to allow it. I think there'll also be plenty of people at United looking at this thinking, hang on, we've got a 70 million asset here, right? We either need to make this work or not make entirely clear to the market that he has no place at Manchester United, right? Because then you're just running down this asset. So if United was to get an offer in January, why would anyone go above, 25 million? Because they know that he's not going to get a game at United. So I think that's another difficulty with it. And then you're almost, as there may be with a few players next summer, almost like relying on a Saudi bailout. Right? Like when I think of so many players that United might need to move on, I look at someone like Casemiro, who I love as a player, but also, thinking ahead to next summer and how difficult he's found the first few weeks of this season, you half wonder if United might be thinking, well, if we can get 60 million back for him, given he's on a 5-year contract, that's a big contract, maybe you take it. And Sancho might be a similar thing. But I think, that the longer the Saudi league goes along, the less inclined I think they will be to pay these highly disruptive transfer fees, which they had to do at the start.
Just moving on again then, Erik Ten Hag obviously has been sort of a constant through all of these stories, and personally the idea that he was happy for Greenwood to come back was something I didn't like reading, and that has made me obviously consider things about Ten Hag. But as a manager and on the footballing side of things, I was very impressed with last season. I thought he did a lot of good things. There's also been these rumours about how he's dealt with certain things, and the Sancho thing and his discipline, and how he is with the players. And you watch them on the pitch, and for the first 15 minutes of games they look like everyone's playing for him, and then for the last sort of 65 or 75 they look like they want him to leave. How are things behind the scenes as far as you understand it? Because if nothing else, it must be sort of quite highly charged, let alone, maybe some people are sort of unhappy with how he's dealt with things.
Yeah, I mean, nobody does a doom spiral like Manchester United,
I know.
Post-Ferguson, right? And 1 or 2 bad results become a crisis very, very quickly. Not even bad results, bad performances can become a crisis very quickly at Man United. I think with Ten Hag, it's interesting because the things that he's being maybe criticised for now, the discipline, the rules, which he always talks about, were the things that United wanted after kind of the shambles of that season where you had Solskjaer and Rangnick. Yeah. Right? It was this idea that the culture was wrong. There needed to be more discipline, more respect, no more, all those stories around sort of player power at United. And now you've got someone enforcing that. Yeah. You have quite a strong backlash against it in some quarters. So that's always the reality of football. It's like whenever, someone like Steve McLaren, who was when he was England manager, was seen as being quite friendly with the players. He leaves, you get Fabio Capello in because he's hard and he's going to be a bit more standoffish. You always go for the opposite. In terms of the mood behind the scenes, I think results always play a part in this. The idea that, and you're also going to have that there are players that United didn't move out that aren't thrilled about the fact they're not playing. Right? Of course, Harry Maguire would like to be playing. If he's not leaving, if he's not leaving the club, he's not going to be happy. It wouldn't be normal for him to be happy as 4th choice, 5th choice centre half. I think the difficult thing at the start of this season is, one, obviously the injuries have been a big problem, but I do think they've got a lot worse over the past week. It doesn't explain why Wolves ran through the United team 15 times on the opening day, or Forest going 2-0 up in the opening 6-7 minutes or so, or the Tottenham game. I think one of the difficulties we've got is I think people are now looking quite closely at his recruitment. Yeah. I love Lisandro Martinez last season. I think he's had a really difficult start to this season. You look at Casemiro, second season, you're not quite sure what that's going to look like. I think Mason Mount, I think the judgment on him has been far too harsh and early. I've seen two matches and he's working out what that role will be, but clearly because of United's budget constraints, it sounds a bit silly when they spend as much as they do, but because of the budget, if you were going to spend 50 million on someone, it needs to work. Yeah. Right. Same with the goalkeeper. Yeah. I think the goalkeeper will be fine. Yeah, me too. Long term, but equally, they need him to get better fast. Right. You can't have some of the goals that have gone in over the last few weeks. And Højlund is, I said it when he joined, I just felt like the pressure on him was going to be very, very unfair for a 20-year-old because my expectation of Højlund this season is he'll probably score 15 goals. And for a 20-year-old in his first year in English football who had barely even completed, not that many 90 minutes in Serie A, that's fantastic. But Man United need a striker that's scoring 30 goals if they're going to make that jump to where they needs to be. So then you start looking at other players in the team, like players of the age of Shaw, Fernandes, Rashford, who are at an age where they need to be winning now. Yeah. So there's just these disconnects in terms of where the team's heading and when they feel that final destination will be. Because I don't at the moment I mean, they're clearly not going to win the league this season. I think we can say that already. And I don't know when their aim is to be that step closer. That's the feel-good stuff.
I know, that's all the feel-good stuff, and that is all we've got time for. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for coming on. Thank you for having the chat. And again, massive props and credit for the way you handled the Greenwood situation and the information that you gathered and put out there. Even, again, regardless of what people's thoughts are on it, knowing what was going on in the club is what pretty much every United fan wanted, and you brought that. So, again, thank you very much for that. Thank you for watching at home. Hit subscribe if you haven't already. This has been a one-on-one interview with Adam Crafton from The Athletic. Thanks for watching.